Alrighty, welcome to the Reputation Revolution, where we dissect what's involved in building a thoughtful way, a professional, credible, personal brand that people recognise, respect, and trust. Now, my guest today is an Australian digital pioneer, and he was making a splash on the global social media scene way back in 2007, if you can believe it. And as the publisher of the groundbreaking collaborative marketing book called Age of Conversation, he's known as the Servant of Chaos, still the best nickname you'll hear of anyone. And he's founder of Disruptors Co. There's a bit of a theme there, chaos and disruption. And he's here to tell us all about the new B2B influencer marketplace called InfluencerActive. Welcome to the show, Gavin Heaton. What were you doing 10 years ago?
My God, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was all about enterprise. So I was working at SAP, and I was, I think 10 years ago, I was the head of the social department of the Premier Customer Network.
The social department?
Yeah, I was the social department, to be honest.
God, it's amazing that I suppose it's a tech company. They were sort of pretty much ahead of the time in what they were doing. So probably the Twitter and the like was not as rough and ready as it is today. I think we were both on Twitter in those early days, going back to 2007. But even around 2010, 2011, it wasn't bad times on Twitter.
No, well, it was interesting in that you could find and meet people that you would otherwise not be able to find and meet.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder to do that these days.
Yeah, indeed. And that's how we found each other many moons ago. So we're going to talk today, as I said, Gavin, about InfluencerActive. But more broadly, I'll get you to tell us a bit about that. But more broadly, I want to talk about influencers, but not of the we can touch on the Instagram variety and the normal consumer ones that we get and we hear all about ad nauseum, but we want to talk about professional, more micro influencers or nano influencers. I might get you to explain the difference in a tick, but people who have influence in the professional sphere and how we can work with them and how they can work with us as brands and how we can all collaborate and play happy families together. So let's rock into that. But first, tell us a bit about InfluencerActive, because it's only reasonably new, isn't it?
Yeah, we've only been going since September, so it is very new.
You haven't even got the T-shirt for that yet.
I don't even have a T-shirt for that one yet. It'll just be a whole lot of faces.
And so what does it do? It's obviously a marketplace and it's for B2B. Is it the only one of its kind in the world?
It's the only one of its kind that we have found so far. I'm sure there are probably a couple of these. I mean, there are a couple of these platforms that are out there, but this one focuses specifically on business-to-business influencers.
Yeah.
We don't really do the consumer focused influence, and we focus largely on LinkedIn at this stage. Although we're sort of starting to spread our wings a little bit on that front.
To which other ones are most important for you?
Really, it depends on the people involved. So what's really interesting is that we are a marketplace. We're not an agency. So we don't really want to be in the middle between brands and the influencers themselves. But what we know is that influencers, and especially the business influencers, they already have day jobs. They're successful business people in their own right. It just so happens they've built a substantial network around the work that they do, and whether it was done, deliberately, or whether it was just a byproduct of being, a fabulous business leader, the profile that they've built has become useful to not just themselves but to others. And I think we don't want to get in the way of saying this is what you need to do and this is the way you should approach these things. Certainly we can provide some tips and guidance, but we want to really make sure that we can democratize that access to the best and brightest on the social web for business, for brands, wherever they happen to be.
So it's obviously a business. How do you make the money out of it then? Is it a clip the ticket type scenario?
Yeah. It's basically a commission.
Yep. All righty. So, and again, at the outset, we're talking about, Instagram influencers and Kardashians and so many other names that I don't know about, but they tend to be more so very much Instagram. YouTubers fall into that, and maybe YouTubers will be, you can have business YouTubers as well that might fall into the B2B space. Twitter, no doubt there will be some people on Twitter that are influencers, given that Twitter is, I think, the influence channel. But you're probably less likely to find B2B on Instagram, or you're pretty open on that?
We found a few, but I mean, certainly in the creative industry. So places like fashion and even some technology, obviously, computers and
Yep.
um, uh, innovation tech, I guess, is kind of or gadget tech, if you like, is a fairly strong category there.
Yep. Yep.
So anything that becomes easily saleable through a digital platform is where the money is. The
Yeah.
money sits.
Yeah. And so give us an example of a flavor of some of probably the more high profile, because we probably, we think of, we probably don't think of business influencers too much on LinkedIn, although there's quite a few people who call
Mm.
themselves LinkedIn influencers. Sometimes they
Yes.
do it as one word, sometimes it's two. Usually the people who tout themselves as influencers are probably not influential, but you have got a few by looking at it that they've got some pretty big audiences. Do you want to sort of give us an example? Because people might be blown away of how many people you can get following you on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, yeah.
Not being the big, Obama or Richard Branson and
Yeah.
no doubt Elon Musk. They've all got big followings on LinkedIn. But who are some ones that their names that people might not know?
Yeah, for sure. So it's I mean, super interesting. We've got about 100 influencers from about 22 countries, I think they are so far. And what is fascinating about LinkedIn as an influence channel is that it's got its own culture. And I think this is true of each of the social media platforms. They each have their own culture and way of doing things. And LinkedIn is particularly interesting for the approach that it takes, and when it does and doesn't work. From my perspective, and to be honest, I don't have a massive influencer following on LinkedIn at all. But by working with those that do, I've learned some super interesting things. So, for example, we have a guy from Canada called Strategy Georgopoulos. He has probably under 1 million followers, but maybe it's 800,000, maybe it's 900,000. I don't have exact numbers, but it's a fairly substantial number right there.
Yep. Yeah. What does he do? What's his day gig?
So he's a strategist and works in marketing and positioning, and he's an advisor. So what we're finding is that the people that have been attracted to this platform have sort of multi-channel careers. So they're probably business leaders in their own right. They may have run their own business, or they may work in a large organization or a small organization. They will have LinkedIn as a channel that they use to grow their thought leadership and position what they know about their business and the world. But then at the same time, they also will see it as a little bit of a media channel, and they like to see the growth in that. They're passionately interested in individuals. In Australia, we've got a woman called Sonia McDonald. She does a lot of work in the area of leadership and capability development, that sort of area. So it's a good connection for people who are trying to grow their professional brand. Because she can sort of coach them through that process, and she also provides coaching services, of course. Right. So it's the extension from doing what they already do into something like growing someone else's brand, or growing someone else's business from an ambassadorship kind of angle is relatively simple stage for most of the influencers to move to.
Yeah. And I guess in that regard, that they do come from probably a business background, so they would understand, there's got to be probably a connection on things, like there's no disconnect. They'd be pretty strong with their personal brands. And I guess even in the more mainstream consumer influencer, the smart ones just don't take jobs and money, and they connect with, they partner with brands that they probably already use, or they like them, genuinely like them, because their audience can sniff out a fake a mile away. And that's what I've noticed between the also rans who'll take a quid wherever they can and shortcut whatever they can in that space, because people are making money. and the big guys who are, they run their own products, or, they've got their own app, or, that side of things. They've got multiple streams, and they're micro mavens, basically. They're creating a decent sized business enterprise around their personal brand. But as you say, the others, the business ones more likely are consultants or coaches or speakers, or they might be a leader in another organization. Or do you find that they're mostly self-employed? As in they run their own business?
There's a bit of a mix, actually. Some of them are consultants, some of them actually run businesses. Some of them are employed by larger organizations.
Yep.
It's just a little bit tricky, I think, sometimes when they are employed by an organization, that there can be that overlap between what is something they might work on in their professional channel and what they were working on in their professional life. And so I think they have to be be able to manage that fairly carefully.
And I guess the other part of that is that, they've got to make sure that, if they're employed by someone else, that who are you giving all your effort to? What's in it for us?
That's right.
That side of things. But if you run your own gig and you go with the flow, you do whatever the heck you like. So with that in mind, are you looking at influence more as audience, or do you find these people really have genuine influence? What are you seeing on that regard? Because just because you've got a big audience, and we know, again, from the consumer side, that sometimes because people have got a big audience, I remember the story of one influencer, and their name escapes me, but I probably wouldn't say it anyway. And she had like 1 million people, like massive audience, and created her own t-shirt line and sold virtually none. So clearly there was not a lot of influence there, and the big audience, but not that necessarily engaged. What are you finding that side of things? Because influence is a bit of a tenuous thing. Someone with a smaller, more engaged following might have more influence than someone who's got 1 million followers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it works in a couple of different ways, and it really depends on the style of influencer that you're working with. So some are good at activating audiences. Some are good at I guess providing information. So if we think about the way I often talk to the influencers about this is that, if we look at the marketing funnel itself and say at the top level, we have that awareness, we're sort of dropping down into interest and consideration, down to decision making, figuring out where an influencer can best play a role in the customer journey for your brand or your product is really important. So if you're maybe just doing a product launch or a brand launch, and you just need that top of funnel awareness, then great, go with someone who has a very wide reach. Go with someone with big numbers and so on, and take advantage of that. But as you start to require more authenticity or domain expertise in your product or service category, then you also need to be more targeted in the way that you approach an influencer and the type of influencer that you're going to use as part of your strategy. So it really depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Do you find that the influencers are good content creators as well, or they're just great at curating content and building a presence on LinkedIn that way?
Yeah, so some are really good at some of them are really good at curating content, and so a lot of
which is a skill. It's a real skill,
absolutely.
And when there's so much noise, I wouldn't be putting that down.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the brands that we work with come with content. So they're like, we've got a video, we've got an instruction, we've got a product demo that we'd love to put out there, and those sorts of things. And so it's a fairly easy sort of lift and publish. Whereas but then if you're trying to generate sales or generate awareness or whatever it is you're trying to do, generally you want your influencer to follow through with some conversation or some sort of positioning or whatever it happens to be. So making sure there's that strong alignment between where their domain expertise is, what they feel comfortable doing, and so on. But we generally find that someone who has a good profile, a strong profile, and a strong audience, they know enough between content creation, content curation, and then audience activation, and the three together tends to work really, really well.
And there's so many things, and I often think that the straight plug and play, like we've got this content, can you do something with it? I mean,
Yeah.
that's often when that comes involved, it tends to be from the media buyer potentially, or
Yeah.
the marketing department, whereas if it's a PR department using it, or, for a bigger brand, for example,
Yeah.
they tend to look at the media, the influencer relations, and how can we go deeper in conversation, and maybe we
Yeah.
interview you, and a video series, or get you to write
Mhm.
a report, or front this interview series, or you're either being the interviewer or the interviewee. Like there's,
Yep.
when you break it down, if the influencer is good and can present, and there's so many things, if they can write, and you've got to play to their strengths too, because if they are
Mm.
someone who does LinkedIn Live, for example, and they're really good
Yep.
on camera, well, jump on that. If they're really great writers and deep thinkers, jump on that. Bring them
Yeah.
to your event. Get them to, when we'll have them again. But there's so many ways, and I think if you're going to become an influential person, a person of influence in your domain, or your industry, or in business generally, it's really worth understanding the elements. It's not just I need a big following, so people can pay me to post about it, because there's a lot more to it than that. And you'll get probably, if you have a real partnership with them and
Hmm.
suggest different things, then you'll probably get a better remuneration for it. And I reckon that I know quite a few. I know quite a few sort of speakers who are entrepreneurial, who do other things, and
Hmm.
they're not just the speaker, but then, well, how about I write this for you, and I can do your social media along the way, or we can do some interviews beforehand, or whatever before the conference. They're the ones that are, the conference organizers and brands really like working with, because they're creative and trying to do different things.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting in that some brands are really adaptable and
Hmm.
ready for that sort of work. So, but it requires them to think through what it is that they were trying to achieve, but then also tapping into different forms of media.
Yep.
Like as you're sort of saying, so an event series, or a LinkedIn Live, or a forum, or a Zoom call. Like all those sorts of things can work, or it could just be post some stuff for me, follow up with some conversations, all those sorts of things. So the way that we structured InfluencerActive was to allow the influencers to create different types of basically media buys or placements, and then for brands to come along and say, great, I'll have 2 of those and 1 of those and 5 of those and so on, and then just sort of plan it out. And so it requires the brands, I guess, to have a really strong sense of what it is that they can do, and what they're trying to achieve with their influencer program.
What would you suggest would paint a picture for us? What would be an entry level person coming into, like saying, okay, I want to go up be part of the marketplace, put my hand up, put my head up over the parapet. What what level should they be, in a genuine sense?
So we're focused on I guess the larger scale, or the larger numbers so far, mostly because that's where the customers have been asking for.
So if we
Uh,
look at LinkedIn, what's probably a threshold
about
to get into it?
30,000 followers.
Followers, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then from 30,000, we've got people everywhere from that 30,000 point, maybe even a few that are under 30, just under 30 in different markets, right through to, suddenly you jump to maybe 100,000, where it starts to get substantial.
Hmm.
Then the jump from 100,000 to, say, 1 million isn't the next big barrier, which seems like a lot, right? We've just had one of our influencers, Anthony James, has just surpassed 2 million followers.
2 million. Yes, I'm connected with Anthony, and I'm probably one of 2 million. Although they're followers, you can only actually have 30,000 connections with LinkedIn.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's
that's where
kind of,
LinkedIn's changed too, is that they,
yeah,
over the last few years, they've allowed you to follow people,
yeah.
and that's why some of these people. So let's look at Anthony. How does he, get 2 million people that you could see from where you sit? I mean,
Yeah, I have asked him, and he does have a bit of a system around this, of course, and I think most of these folks do. But where they've been able to um, build their networks fairly quickly has been by tapping into influence networks, even
right.
even though they didn't necessarily call them that. But there's a whole series of these pods that work together to amplify and extend their reach.
Right.
And they basically sort of generate the initial burst of activity. So we know that certain times of days work really well. We know that certain channels work and certain types of content works and so on. But then also there's like a delay lag as well. So things that were really strong, say in September, may come back in April, and video works really well at the moment. We're testing a little bit with some of the LinkedIn stories, because there's some really strong stats around that. You know, LinkedIn is very poor when it comes down to being able to share information about the reach and the frequency and the statistics behind anyone who's clicking on anything. And you know, that's one of the weaknesses of the platform, but it's also therefore one of the challenges we face in terms of being able to share with brands how this is working. But again, it comes down to understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. And most of the brands that have worked closely with influencers, they tend to find, and Anthony's probably a good example of this. You know, people will approach him because he has a large following, and they'll say, "Can you share this information with me or with your network?" and so on. He's great. Yeah, great. You know, here's a link to my profile in InfluencerActive. Just book me in, and I'll have a look at it. And if it works, and I think it works for my audience, then I'll come up with a deal. Sometimes he says this doesn't really work for my my audience, so he'll pass it on or recommend someone else on the platform and say, you know, talk to Steve Blakeman or talk to Jennifer Garrett or someone like that, because it works better for their audience or their location. But then once he's got that, we can sort of see a whole series of conversations that he may have with the brand. So asking them questions, you know, is this the right message? You know, I wouldn't say it this way. I would suggest this. I would suggest a shorter clip or a longer clip. I would suggest, you know, this sort of thing. I need you to follow up with your organization and your teams who are on LinkedIn to actually ask questions or answer the questions that come through. So it becomes more of an activation and less of a just a post that's being pushed out.
Yeah, and do they? I know in the States, in the US, it's by law. I'm not sure about other parts of the world. I don't think it's by law here, but it's morally by law to acknowledge that it's a partnership or it's a commercial arrangement. You know, like now we know Instagrammers, they put sponsor on a post if they've been paid for it. And I noticed I only put up something today for a client on Facebook, and it said, "This looks like branded content. Do you want to tag the, you know, and just let the world know you're being paid?" No, we're just tipping someone else. That's, you know, like clearly, you know, Facebook don't want you to be promoting other people. They obviously think there's always cash in it, but
there's always something.
Yeah, obviously they're jumping on it as well. So where does that fit? Sort of where you see it?
Yeah, we recommend that people disclose where they can when where they think it's appropriate, but also we've got, like I said, we've got so many different people on the platform now, and they're all doing different projects in different countries, and so it depends on. It's hard to know. Depending on where they're promoting. Sometimes one of the challenges with LinkedIn, obviously, is it just goes everywhere. You can't target your own reach. So it is a little bit tricky on that front. But these guys are all aware that if they don't treat their audience fairly, then they'll lose them. And so there is this very strong feedback loop that they're all very, very aware of. So they tend to pay a lot of attention to maybe the squeaky wheels that they may not necessarily have to pay attention to, but they do because they're very much authentic in their space.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, it's well documented that, you know, if you are, you know, being paid for something and you're upfront with your audience and you genuinely like the brand that you're partnering with, then, you know, that's where the influence can be, because people just want you to be upfront, and if you treat your audience with respect, which these guys obviously do, then that's when you get longevity. But if it's just an in and an out, And again, I think there's going to be a bit of a difference between a B2B one where you have to work in the industry and you're part of it, and you've got your networks and your connections versus Instagram, which still is a bit more of a bit of a broadcast channel in that regard. So let's shift gears for a tick, Gavin, because you're known as a servant of chaos. You're into disruption. But you've been, you said earlier that you're not influential, but I've always looked up to you as being a key player in the broader digital marketing space. And I do believe you are influential. And you were blogging. How long ago? When did you start blogging? You were one of Australia's early business bloggers.
Yeah, it would have been probably 2006, 2007, I'm thinking.
Because that's when I started in 2007, and I know we sort of caught up at these weird events, in those early days. But where do you see it now? I mean, we touched on it at the outset about, Twitter was, very community minded, and bloggers promoted the heck out of each other, and there was. I don't think there was too many podcasters in those days. I think it was a little bit clunky, and YouTube hadn't really got going properly. So it really was the written word, and there was not much. There was no live or any. The great things we've got now, and whereas now it's becoming a bit more broadcast, etc. But I just, apart from the angst that's caused politically and across COVID and people arguing and fighting on a lot of the social channels. But if you take that, there's small amounts of people who just make a lot of noise. But if you take a lot of that out, I'm starting to see, and I think maybe it was because of 2020 and the year we had, that there's a bit of a return to community. At the end of the day, that's all you've really got. Because it's harder to get your content through. It's noisier out there. There's people making big claims, all of that stuff. And we just want a bit of authenticity, a bit of humanity, and we want to deal with like-minded people who share our values. And I think, and I think a key play in that, Gavin, is, we see how the strength of Facebook groups and those community groups, Mighty Networks is a white label one. Where people are wanting to go to safe havens, where they can ask questions and make comments and not look silly and not be bashed around the virtual ears. And so I think that there's a need for it. And you look at Nike have got a big one, and Peloton have got quite a big Facebook group, and they bring the brand's job is to bring people together, whether you're a thought leader. So if you're a thought leader, your job is to bring people together. I'm working with one client now who's building his own paid membership, and it's a safe place for leaders and entrepreneurs, and people love that stuff. Are you sort of seeing that? What are you seeing about social generally?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think part of it is, I think part of it's a bit of a return to not necessarily authenticity, but I guess shared values. And we've seen that the values conversation is quite amplified on places like Twitter, but it doesn't mean that you can't sort of hive some of the passion out of that and sort of really focus on the values and the connectedness piece. But I think also what is really starting to play out is a recognition that the media channels that we used to rely on, for getting messaging out there and so on, really have become so fragmented they're almost impossible to use. And so if you want to go out and reach, 500,000 people, it's really hard work. I've just been doing some brand strategy with some clients recently, and I haven't done that for a little while. But interestingly, when I tried, it was like, oh my God, this is so hard, because if you don't have a paid and owned and earned kind of channel strategy, then you've got nothing to work with.
I hear you. It's really, I think you want to be owning your own channels, whether it's your email list, I think it's still gold, your own website, blog, content hub, call it what you will. I mean, even YouTube videos, they're the videos. So if YouTube goes down, you put the videos up on Vimeo or somewhere else. So, and a podcast, I mean, they're your owned media. channels that you own and control. And I guess on social, you still own and control the content you put on. But as we know that, Facebook continues to throttle organic reach, and at the moment, LinkedIn's quite good, but I see the organic reach is starting to be a bit squeezed there as well. It's only a matter of time before they go the way of the Facebook.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that's hard. You're saying that's really hard to get through to people, isn't it?
It is, and I was looking at Clubhouse, this new social audio platform for social audio, and it feels a little bit like Twitter was, 10 years ago, in that the same mechanisms are playing out. So you've got the early adopters coming in and they're building, and staking out some space, and then they're doing invitation only to their friends and networks, and that's giving that fear of missing out. So you've got people rushing in. Today, I think as we're talking, we've got Elon Musk joining in, and he's already, killing it, because he's got, I think each room will take 6,000 listeners, and he's already killing the rooms, right? So we're seeing that sort of thing. And what is interesting is it offers exactly what Twitter used to offer, which is easy access to thought leaders and early adopters who you respect and have heard of. So it brings that kind of micro celebrity into play, and they may not be everybody's, or household names, but they're household names in your industry.
Yeah.
If you're paying attention, right? So I think that's where this is interesting, and I'm kind of interested to see what happens next with those next steps in those spaces.
Yeah, and it's really it's like early Twitter. It's the ones the rooms that I've been in, and just listening. They're very respectful.
Yes.
Which is not something people expect on social at the moment. And you have to put your hand up and be put up on stage before, on a virtual stage before you can talk, as I understand it. But some of the growth with some of these people who are giving it a fair nudge. I was listening to one guy the other day, and he was just saying that, he's really focusing on it, but he's gone from next 0 to 40,000 followers within weeks.
Right.
That's big. You can't do that on Twitter. And I don't think there's a way to game it just yet. So I think it could be pretty real. But I think it's worth, if you're an aspiring sort of thought leader and you're wanting to build a professional brand, a voice of influence, it's worth having your finger on the pulse. Again, depending on your industry, if you're a bit more tech focused, definitely on Clubhouse.
Yes.
It's worth just seeing, because if it does take off, but the fact of the matter is, if it does take off, or Twitter come in and go bang and do its own version, which I think I've read somewhere that it will be launched at some point. I remember Meerkat. Meerkat was the first live streaming, I think, social live streaming, and it was launched at what's the one in Austin?
At South by
Southwest, and it was launched there, and big thing, and now you can be live streaming from your phone, and bang, then Twitter announced its own and killed it stone dead. So it's, I think Clubhouse need to get out really quickly and build that audience, but no doubt Twitter will be there. And I think you look at the macro, it's audio, isn't it? Like what we're seeing here is the growth of audio in podcasting, the growth of audio in paid. There's thing called Soundwise, where you can actually charge for your audio subscriptions. So audio is, and I think, no one's really getting into audio white papers or audio reports or whatever. It's still, when we think audio, we think podcasting, but it's a lot more than that. And I think the Clubhouse goes to show that, whereas video is really important and live's going nuts, and there's some great stuff for it. But the whole thing about audio is a bit of the unsung hero. I think it's just grinding away in the background, building up followings. And I think there's a lot more to play out. And I think Twitter will be next in. So I think Clubhouse is still with us, and I think got a long way to play there. But it's worth looking at the macro anyway. And if you want to, have that voice of influence, you need to be sort of upfront and not being the font of all knowledge necessarily, but bringing people together and come to the church, and we'll let you all speak.
It's as much curation of individuals as well, or professionals as well as content.
Yeah, and they have moderators and everything. it's pretty full on. It's a good little thing. What else do you see that's next in line? Where are you concentrating your efforts, given that you run a company, but you have got a lot of other things? I didn't have time at the outset and the intro to lay them all out, but what are a few other things that you're involved with, and where and how are you cutting through the noise and getting your story, your message out there, and what sort of content are you creating these days?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's actually a lot of work, as you know, right? So I think in the past we used to be able to, we'd hire an agency or we'd buy media or we'd do all this spending, and these days you kind of have to do the work. You can still you can still buy media and you can still pay for content and all those sorts of things, but there's a lot of foundation work that is required by each business and each brand to actually stake out its claim, be authentic, deliver value for its clients, and so on. So the time that we used to spend maybe doing outbound things, we kind of have to work on ourselves. So I feel like it's a little bit like personal influence 101. Come back, do the hard work, do the foundations, put that in place. So from I guess from our business point of view, we've actually just been launching a business collaboration piece of software, and it allows us to do the kind of creative work that we like to do in teams, in workshops, and in hackathons, to bring groups of people together around a shared value and a shared purpose. Really use some techniques and approaches to workshop those ideas, turn them into something that we can validate, test, get out into market, maybe do some research, and then keep iterating on those things. It's called the Airworks. And and what is interesting for us is that it's a software business, not a services business. So we've had to go back and back to my SAP days and remember what it's like to market software and build software support around a different type of digital service rather than services providing digital services. It's services providing digital experiences.
Well, you don't stand still, Gavin. You don't stand still. And that's the key. Is you've just got to be curious and keep going out there. And certainly in businesses, there's so many opportunities. But then, how can you, use your brand to leverage that business as well? You hear the stories of people who are running quite big businesses off the back of their personal brand now. So it's as everything gets noisier and everyone says how great they are and everyone's an influencer and stuff, it's the ones that can genuinely prove it, and they don't have to go around telling people because people are talking about them. So they're known and they're liked and they're trusted and they're front of mind and they're being talked about in the marketplace and in a respectful way. And I think there's some key indicators there and in that regard. Mate, you've probably got a million websites, but what's the best place for people to find you on the interwebs?
These days, it's probably best at disruptorsco.com and also twitter.com/servant of chaos.
Servant of Chaos. There we go. Thank you very much, Gavin Heaton, aka, I've got to say it once more time, Servant of Chaos.
Great. Thanks, Trevor.
Cheers.